Thank you, Dr. Chairman, and Rabbi Fried, and welcome to all of you. I've chosen a subject which I'm not a doctor myself, but because of my position as head of the Beis Din, the problems which come to me today are relevant to what I'm going to speak about. In fact, the subject is IVF, in vitro fertilization, egg donation, and PGD, pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. Now, these are subjects which come up frequently to the Beis Din, and I'll try and explain to you what the problems are. Approximately 15% of couples encounter some form of infertility. The causes are many and numerous, may be due to the conditions in the husband, maybe in the wife, or indeed due to a combination of factors in both partners. Today, due to medical advancement and sophisticated medical technology, much has been achieved in helping solve some of these problems. And I'm referring specifically to in vitro fertilization. In vitro fertilization techniques are often employed when it is not possible for a woman to become pregnant by natural means because of her inability to produce viable ova. Could be because of a blockage in the fallopian tubes, although normal ovulation does occur. IVF procedure consists of recovering ovum, or a multiple number of ova, from the ovary, fertilizing them with the sperm of the husband in vitro, and this is done in a petri dish, and after undergoing a number of cell divisions, transferring the resulting embryo into the uterus of the woman from whom the ovum was removed. And in this case, it's the wife. Halachically, the majority of authorities are of the opinion there's no halachic problem. That means from Jewish medical ethics or Jewish ethics from Jewish law, there's no problem here. This is a normal case of IVF between husband and wife where, in fact, if you would ask a question to a Beis Din or to an authorized rabbi, the answer would be, go ahead. If, however, the wife can't produce viable ova, unable to produce her own eggs due to hormonal deficiency, genetic predisposition, or other conditions, it has now become a successful procedure called egg donation, whereby eggs donated by a stranger, or maybe by a relative, are fertilized in vitro with the sperm of the husband and then inserted into the uterus of the other wife, infertile wife, and carried to term. This is egg donation. When the fertility problem arises from the woman's inability to sustain a pregnancy for the full period of gestation, the fertilized egg may be implanted into the uterus of another woman, a host mother, or surrogacy, who will carry the fetus to term. Now, these last two cases, egg donation and also where it's a host mother or surrogacy, in each of these last two cases, there is a Jewish ethical problem involved here. Who is the mother in Jewish law? Who is the mother? Now, this is not a Jewish problem. This could be a problem for any religion, whether it's Catholic or Buddhist, it doesn't make any difference, or even if you have no religion. who is the mother? Is it the genetic mother, the one who donated the ova, or the gestational mother, the one who actually gave birth to the child? Now, in an egg donation, problem is very simple. You have here the person who donated the ova, the genetic or biological mother, and then you have the one who carried the child, the gestational mother, and the mother who gave birth. It's like an incubator. Now, who is the mother? Now, you may say to me, so what's the difference? Who's the mother? Big difference. In Jewish law, it can make a big difference. Can the child born from an egg donation, can he marry a sibling? You're not allowed to marry a sister. Now, if he would like to marry the sibling of the mother who donated the ova, maybe his sister, a maternal sister. If, on the other hand, in Jewish law, the mother is not the genetic mother, but the gestational mother, the mother who carried the child and gave birth to the child, then this child could marry a sibling from the genetic mother because it's not his mother. Now this, from a Jewish point of view, it's a real ethical shaila. It's a question, halachic shaila, in Jewish law. But it's not only a question for a Jewish person, even somebody who's not Jewish. Let me say, let's go to a court of law. One of the mothers dies, and the only child is this child. Does that child inherit the genetic mother, or does the child inherit the birth mother? Question is, who's the child? I don't know whether in American law, I don't know whether we've got any lawyers here, but if there were lawyers, the question would be put to them, who is the mother? Now, most people must probably, you don't even bother to write down. There's, in England today, there's a law that the child at the age of 18 has the right to find out who is the genetic mother. And likewise, even with a sperm donation, they have the right to find out who is the father. Makes problems, because till now you could get the eggs. Because of this, many people have resisted from giving the eggs, because maybe in 18 years' time somebody will knock at their door and they say, I'm your son. And it's making problems, does make problems. But this is the law in England. I don't know what the law is in America. But it's a question of law here. It's not just a question of Jewish medical law or Jewish ethical law. It's a question, who is the legal mother of this child? Now, these are two differences. But let me give you another difference in Jewish law. You have a son who wants to marry a Jewish girl. You have a daughter, she wants to marry a Jewish boy. In Jewish tradition, you marry in the religion. Don't marry somebody who's not of the religion. Now, the genetic mother, that means the mother who donated the egg, was a non-Jewish mother. And the mother who carried the child was a Jewish mother. What is this child? Is this child Jewish, or is this child a Gentile? Now, you may ask, what's the difference is? Gentile, if you want to become Jewish, you'll have to go through the process of conversion. But this is a very... Now, let's take it the other way around. I mean, vice versa. If the genetic mother was Jewish and the surrogate mother was non-Jewish, is this child Jewish? I must tell you, it happened actually in England some time ago that someone who is of the priestly tribe, now I say priest tribe, but Kohen, somebody called Cohen, and he's of the priestly tribe, and his wife, she could produce ova or ovum, and but she couldn't carry the child. And therefore she had to get her surrogate mother to carry the fertilized embryo, which was the sperm of her husband, and her eggs. And they had triplets, but the surrogate mother was non-Jewish. And the question came to the Beis Din, are these children are these children Jewish or they're not Jewish? The first question was, do we do a circumcision on the children? Because Jewish children, boys, have to have a circumcision. And here it was a question. Now, if they're not Jewish, there's no obligation on the community or on the parents to do a circumcision. Then, I'll let you know what happened then. Later, when the children grew up, they had bar mitzvah. There was a question, are they of the priestly tribe? Now, if they're not Jewish, then they're not of the priestly tribe, even if you had converted them. They become ordinary Israelites. Now, I think most of you know that according to the Jewish tradition, according to Jewish law, someone who is of the priestly tribe gets called up to the portion of the law on the Sabbath, the first one. But if you're not, you can't get the first one, you get number 3. And here was a question, you got 3 boys with a father who is of the priestly tribe. What about these boys? Are they were Jewish because they were converted on the doubt. After they were born, about 6 months later, they were converted. You may ask me a question, how can you convert and make Jewish somebody who's not Jewish without asking them consent? You can make somebody Jewish if the person wants to be Jewish and gives their consent to it. But a young child of 6 months doesn't know whether yes or no. You can't explain to the child. And yet these children were converted. I must tell you that the Talmud, which was written about a long time ago, nearly 2,000 years ago, discusses this question. How can you convert someone? Let me give you an example. It happens all the time. It's probably here in Texas as well. A Jewish couple can't have children, and they adopt a child. They adopt a child. Now, where do you get adoption? You go to adoption society. Now, the majority of children in adoption society are non-Jewish. To get a Jewish child is difficult. At least I'm speaking from Europe or from England. To get a Jewish child is very difficult. But non-Jewish you can get because the majority of the world is non-Jewish. Now, if you get a non-Jewish child, these parents want the child to be Jewish. So what do? If the child's a boy, it goes through a conversion, and this conversion entails immersion in a ritual bath and also circumcision. Naturally, it needs the consent of the parents who have adopted this child. Now, the question again is, how do you adopt a child? How do you make a child? Perhaps the child doesn't want to be Jewish, wants to remain what they are, natural without any religion. And the Gemara asks this question, the Talmud asks this question, and the Talmud says, anything which is beneficial to the child, you can act without their consent. Now, let me give you an example. I don't know what the banks are called. Well, us, we have Barclays Bank, Westminster Bank. There are various banks, American Bank. I go into one of the banks here in America, and I say, I'd like to take from Mr. Rothschild, certain Mr. Rothschild, I'd like to withdraw $200. So the teller says to me, have you got authority to withdraw this money? I said, no, I haven't got any authority. So the teller says, I also haven't got any authority. I can't act on behalf of Mr. Rothschild without his authority. I said, fair enough. I put my hand in my pocket. I take out $200. I said, can you put this into the account of Mr. Rothschild? The teller takes the money straight away and puts it in. So I said, have you got authority to put that money in? The answer is you don't need special authority. Anything which is beneficial to the customer, I can act on his behalf because this is automatically his consent. We feel, as a Jewish community, we feel if the parents are Jewish and they want to adopt a child, to bring up a non-Jewish child is going to make difficulties for the child as well. It's to the benefit of the child that the child should become Jewish. Hence, you don't need his positive consent. we assume it's beneficial to the child. Interesting. When that child gets 13 or 12 as a girl, and they become mature, they have the option of saying, I want to move out, renounce my conversion. I don't want to be Jewish. It has happened. It has happened. But if parents bring up a child the way they should in the Jewish way, then the child will love his Jewishness, most probably the child won't opt out. But halachically, according to Jewish law, that child can opt out. Now, so this is conversion. Now, this gentleman who had triplets through a surrogacy, he converted the children. When they were 13, they had the option of opting out, but they didn't. But the question was, they're Jewish, converted, but they can't be Kohanim, they can't be of the priestly tribe because he's not really the father. This was the question, and it was faced to us. Now, I'll come to it in a little bit, but this is a general question, nothing to do with Jewishness. As a rabbi, and as a Dayan, as a judge in a court, these questions come to me as a Jewish rabbi. But you don't have to be Jewish for these questions. Who is the legal mother? I don't know whether in Texas there's a law about this, but it's a very simple question. The question may not be asked because people don't ask these questions. In fact, most egg donations are done in a fertility clinic privately without any publicity. So you don't even know. Could be a young couple getting married, a Jewish boy, a Jewish girl, and you never know. This is an egg donation. And maybe the egg donation came from an egg bank, where the egg bank was an egg from somebody who's not Jewish. So there could be a problem. It's a problem. This is basically what I want to speak about. And I'd like to quote, although the Talmud, which was written 1,800 years ago, talks about it, although there was no IVF at the time of the Talmud, there was no PGD at the time of the Talmud, and there was no surrogacy. I don't think there was surrogacy. They didn't have the technique, and they didn't have the technology, what they have today. And yet, I'm going to quote to you a Gemara. The Gemara says the following. A woman who was non-Jewish, and she wanted to convert. So she came to the Beis Din, and the Beis Din went through the normal process of conversion, whatever it involves. You learn, you have to practice, and over a period, and then you go through the last stage of conversion, which is immersion in a mikveh, in a ritual bath. And in this way, you accept upon yourself the Jewish religion, and you become Jewish. This lady was pregnant. She was pregnant. Now, an embryo is a separate entity from the mother. It's an entity on its own. It's not the leg of the mother, or the thigh of the mother, or the hand of the mother. It's an entity on its own. Our chachomim, our rabbis call it uber lav yerechimoi. The embryo, the fetus, is not a thigh of the mother. It's a separate entity. So when the mother who was pregnant went through the process of conversion, it was a dual conversion. A conversion on the mother and also a separate conversion on the embryo. Now, the question is, so when the mother went and she immersed in the ritual bath, the embryo also emerged in the ritual bath. Two conversions. So the Talmud asks a very simple question. How does this immersion help for the embryo? Anything which separates the embryo from the water, then the child has not, this embryo has not immersed in a ritual bath because there was an interposition, there was a separation. The mother may have gone in, but the child didn't go into the water. So the Gemara says, this is called, in Jewish law, it's called the chatzitza, a separation. For instance, if a person had to go into a ritual bath for whatever reason, and he had a bandage on his hand, or a marshal on his foot, something which doesn't let the water touch the skin, this is a separation which would invalidate the immersion. So the Gemara, the Talmud asks the obvious question, where's the immersion in the ritual bath of the embryo? And the Gemara answers a very simple question, and the Gemara answers because an embryo is different to a person with an interposition, because an embryo this is the way it develops, and therefore the separation of the mother to the water for the embryo is not called a separation, and therefore the immersion is an immersion of the mother and an immersion of the child. Hence, when the child is born, it's a Jewish child. It needs no conversions anymore. It's already had the conversion. This is the Gemara. Now, I'm going to ask you, all of you, a question. This is something which struck me when I looked at this piece of the Talmud. If you say birth can create Jewishness, let me give it. The egg was an egg from a non-Jewish mother, and the gestation was a Jewish mother. Gestation, or vice versa. The egg was from a non-Jewish mother, and the Jewish mother carried the child. And we're going to say birth is the thing which is the main part, the gestation and the birth, and therefore this child is Jewish. Although genetically this child is not really Jewish because it comes from an ova which was non-Jewish. Now, if that would be so, that birth can create Jewishness, because that's the main part, then I have a question on this piece of the Talmud. When a pregnant mother immerses into a ritual bath, let's say it's only an immersion for the mother. For the fetus, it's not an immersion, because the fetus didn't go into the water, so the mother went in the water, and there was a separation between the fetus and the water. Let's say it was only an immersion for the mother, not for the child. Yet this child, when it's born, it'll be Jewish. You know why? Because it was born from a Jewish mother. The mother became Jewish. There's no question on the mother. The mother went into the ritual bath when she was pregnant, so she's Jewish. When the child was born later, the child is born from a Jewish mother, so the child's also Jewish. So what do we need to say it's a dual conversion? It's not a dual conversion. It's only a conversion on the mother. The child doesn't need a conversion because it was born from a Jewish mother. I think it's quite clear from the Talmud. This was written 1800 years ago, that birth does not create the status of Jewishness. Jewishness depends on conception. If at the conception it was Jewish, that means the egg was Jewish, the ova was Jewish, and the sperm was Jewish. It doesn't have to be the sperm, even a non-Jewish sperm. If the mother is Jewish, the child is Jewish. If the mother is not Jewish at the time of conception, that is a non-Jewish child, and hence even if there was surrogacy of a Jewish mother, it would not create Jewishness. This is to me quite clear. So in other words, if there was egg donation from a bank to a Jewish couple, that child will need, when it's born, it will need conversion. And this is halachically, when I say halachically, that means Jewish ethical law. This is the law, I would say, throughout, which is accepted throughout all the ecclesiastical courts throughout the world, that an egg donation, when it comes from a non-Jewish ova, that child will not be Jewish unless it's later converted. Now, that seems to be quite clear. But now the question is, if both mothers are Jewish, that means the gestational mother is Jewish, the birth mother is Jewish, and the genetic mother is Jewish. Who is the mother? That's a different question altogether. Question of status as Jewish or non-Jewish depends on the fertilization, the conception. What happens later, what happens later can't make it Jewish. If the egg is not Jewish, then the child is not Jewish. But if it's a question of motherhood, where the child's definitely Jewish, the question which is the mother, this is a different question. It's a different question altogether. And here, I'm going to bring you another piece of the Talmud, and this piece of the Talmud will at least show that it could be birth can make motherhood. Birth can create motherhood on its own. Birth can't create Jewishness, but birth can create motherhood. And I'll tell you here the piece of Talmud. You may say the Talmud. Yes, the Talmud didn't know anything about IVF, PGD, and egg donation, but I'm going to bring you a proof from a piece which is written. Now here I'd like to explain something before I do it. I think it's quite clear that in Jewish law, when a non-Jewish child becomes converted, or let's take anybody who converts, a non-Jewish person converts, through conversion we're told that that person is like a newly born child. All previous relationships, blood relationships, are severed. That means, for instance, two brothers, non-Jewish brothers, 20, 25, and they both convert. They're brothers, they're maternal brothers, they're paternal brothers, same father, same mother, non-Jewish father, non-Jewish mother. And they both convert and they become Jewish. Now in Jewish law, if one of the brothers marries, his wife is forbidden to marry, even if the brother dies, forbidden to marry the wife of his late brother. Eisha Sach, that means the wife of a brother may not marry the brother, even if the brother dies. That means there is, in the Bible, there is an exception to this law when there's no children. But this doesn't apply today. Today we don't do it. That means if a brother marries a wife, and then that brother dies with children, the brother cannot marry his sister-in-law, even after his brother has died. This is the law. Now, if two brothers convert, and they both marry, and one of them dies, the brother can marry his sister-in-law. Why? Because being converted severs all previous blood relationship. In Jewish law, they're not really brothers now. They were brothers when they were paternal brothers and maternal brothers as non-Jewish people. But once they convert, and conversion makes them like a newly born child, each one is a separate entity, and they've lost their brotherhood. They've lost, because brotherhood was only as not being Jewish. But once they're Jewish, they've lost that. And therefore, one brother can marry the wife of the other. Now let me give you the classical scenario of the Talmud. A woman was non-Jewish, and she was pregnant with twins. Now I think, if they're twins, they come from the same father. You can't have twins from two fathers. Those are not twins. Twins are from the same father where the sperm is split, and it's the same father. And they both had the same father, non-Jewish mother. Whilst she was pregnant with the twins, she became Jewish. She decided to become Jewish, so she went through the process of becoming Jewish, and she immersed in a ritual bath, and she became Jewish. Now, this Jewishness was 3 conversions: herself, one twin, and the other twin. 3 conversions. This is what the Gemara says, there are 3 conversions. Later, she gave birth to these two boys, twins. Are they brothers or not? No, they're not brothers. All bonds, all previous blood relations have been severed, so they're not paternal brothers. But the Talmud says they are maternal brothers. Why are they maternal brothers? They've all converted. There were 3 conversions. And each conversion is like a new entity on its own. So where's the brotherhood? Birth makes motherhood, and therefore they have the same mother. So you see that motherhood can be created by birth. Even if genetically, they're not genetically, they've got the same mother. But once they've gone through conversion, that severs all blood relationships. They're not brothers, but they're still brothers of the mother. That means maternal brothers, because birth makes the mother their mother, and therefore they have the same mother. This is called maternal brothers. Hence you see from the Talmud that although, now I'll go slowly, that although birth cannot create the status of Jewishness, but it can create motherhood. And here, these children are Jewish, because they went through a conversion with a mother. The question is only, have they got a mother? Birth can create motherhood. So this is an interesting point. So it comes out that a surrogate mother is really a mother, can be a mother. She can't make him non-Jewish or Jewish. That depends on conception. But she can be a mother. So if somebody goes through surrogacy, maybe they'll have 2 mothers. One was the genetic mother, the mother who donated the ova, and one would be the birth mother, because birth could also make. Or you could argue that maybe it's no proof. The Talmud is only speaking in a case where there's no mother of conception, because there was a conversion in between. Then birth can be a motherhood. But where there's a mother of conception, maybe birth doesn't play a role at all. You've already decided who the mother is. It's doubtful. So therefore here is a question which I don't think people have answered. This is a halachic question in Jewish law. Who is the mother? I don't think I can give you a positive answer, and therefore if there is such a question, from a legal point of view, you've got a question. Who is the mother here for inheritance, for instance? I wonder whether in a legal law in Texas anybody talks about this question, or it's ever been brought up. But in Jewish law, it's a question, there's a question of siblings. It could be a major question. Hence, if somebody would ask me, we'd like to have an egg donation, they haven't got children, they've gone to an infertility clinic, a clinic where there's helping you for fertility, and they say, I'd like to have a Jewish egg from somebody who's Jewish. There's a problem here, because if you take a Jewish egg, then you don't know what's going to happen to your children. Who are they going to marry? Maybe they'll marry a sister. And if you go to a Jewish bank, I think in America there is a Jewish bank of Jewish eggs, you don't know if your children, maybe from Europe, will turn up in America, and they both marry together, and it could be a brother and a sister. Very difficult question. It's a difficult question. Hence, if somebody comes to the London Basin, we would advise that it would be much better to take a non-Jewish egg, where there couldn't be a question of a brother and a sister, and then convert the child at a later stage, like every adoption. There could be exceptions to the rule, but I don't want to go back. I'm just giving you the general lines of this. So here we have 2 things. IVF in its husband and wife, I don't think halachically is any question. Egg donation, if it's from a non-Jewish person, I don't see any question in it, because there's no risk of siblings marrying. Egg donation, the only thing, if you take egg donation from a non-Jewish woman, then the child needs conversion because the child's not Jewish. If it's from a Jewish woman, then there's a question, who is the mother? Who is the mother? And this is a question which I would say remains at present. I don't think a definite decision has been made. There are people who say it's the birth mother. There are others who say, but as far as I'm speaking as a Dayan, I would say I don't think there's a real answer to this question. And halachically, from a civil law, that means from legal law, the question remains. Now I still have a few minutes, let me just go on to, not IVF, PGD. Now PGD is this is modern technology. The advancement in the field of fertility has gone on, and many new opportunities have come up, and PGD, which is pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, is something, a wonderful thing. And if a Jewish couple would come to me and ask me, can you do PGD? I would give them every encouragement. And I'm going to tell you what PGD is. You know, every new advancement in medicine, in the medical world, brings and creates new challenges, new questions in Jewish ethical law. Now, despite the fact that in vitro fertilization might be the only opportunity for some couples with fertility problems, there are couples where the issue is not simply having a child, but in having or not having a particular child, like avoiding the birth of a child afflicted with a debilitating and fatal genetic disease. Now, there's some parents, husband and wife, if they have a child without PGD, they may create a child with a genetic disease which is fatal. And they want to avoid this. Now, not every child they're going to have is going to have this genetic disease. But how can they find out which one? So what's today, with modern medical advances, it's possible to directly check the DNA of a single cell and detect chromosomal disturbances, enzyme deficiencies, and genetic disturbances which are in the fertilized egg. So what you do is, you do the following. You use, and this is PDG, pre-implantation. Before you implant it into the uterus, you do a genetic diagnosis whether this embryo has got this disease or not. If it's got it, you discard it. If it hasn't got it, then you can re-implant it. This basically is PDG. If one of the parents of the potential child is a carrier of a genetic disease linked to one of the sex chromosomes, very interesting. Could be if they have a male child, there'll be this genetic disease. If it's a female child, it won't be. Are you allowed to do gender selection with PDG in Jewish law? Is this allowed? That means you would create a fertilized egg through IVF, in vitro fertilization. You would go through PDG and you would find out, is this a male? If it's a male, then it was the husband who's got this genetic disease. No. If it's a female, then you would take it. Now, this is the question. Are you allowed to? Today it's done. Many diseases, and I would say till now, this was an abortion issue. Amniocentesis could be performed during pregnancy, and the specific genetic marker could be analyzed. Then abortion would be the only alternative to avoiding an undesired birth. Today, you don't have to go through that process. Today, you don't have to even insert the embryo back into the uterus of the woman. Before doing so, do this PDG, and you'll see if the disease is there, good. If the disease is gender-linked, you'll find out, is it male, is it female? Fine. And I must tell you, today people are doing this. There are couples, unfortunately, where there would be, say, 1 in 4, 1 or 2 in 4 would be genetic, have a fatal disease which is genetic. In order to avoid this, they go through PGG, and that means if they want to have a child, they have to go through in vitro fertilization. Otherwise, the normal sexual relationship wouldn't be possible for having a child, because then there's the risk. Now, this is a question which would be asked to a rabbi or to a bezdin. Are they allowed to go through this genetic screening for gender selection? Gender selection. Now, they're not doing it for gender selection because they want a boy or they want a girl, or they're doing it because they want a child with black eyes instead of with a different color eyes, or hair which is ginger, or hair which is black, or hair which is a little bit more white. For that, there's been no sanction. For doing that, there's no sanction. No rabbi would give you, or no president would give you sanction for that. But here it's therapeutic, because if you don't give them permission for this, they just can't, they won't be able to have a child, because the risks involved are too great. Now let me explain to you what it is. The method used is IVF. The husband contributes the sperm, the wife the ova, and they're fertilized in a petri dish as before. Then the embryos can be diagnosed for various genetic features, including the impending gender of the embryos. And once they've tested it and it's not affected, then they'll put it back into the wife. Now, where the gender or the genetic problem is gender-linked, there's another way of doing it, besides using PDG. That's PGD, that's pre-implantation gender diagnosis. There's a new thing which is called FCS, flow cytometry separation. I don't know whether you know what that is. It's being used in England quite often. A human being has 23 pairs of chromosomes, and that carry the genes of all genetic features of a human. One pair of these chromosomes is the sex chromosome, and that determines the gender of that human being. Both male and female contribute one chromosome. A combination of 2 chromosomes, and they have to be 2 X chromosomes, will result in a female offspring. If it's an X chromosome with a Y chromosome, then it'll be a male offspring. A female has 2 X chromosomes, so she will automatically contribute an X chromosome. However, a male can contribute an X chromosome or a Y chromosome. If he contributes an X chromosome, the offspring will be female because you've got 2 X's. If he contributes a Y, then the offspring will be a male. Now, the method of FCS sorts the sperm based on the fact that X-bearing sperm has 2.8% more DNA than a Y chromosome. So a fluorescent dye is applied to the sperm and then passed through a flow cytometer, and this cytometer measures the amount of fluorescent light given off by the DNA. The X chromosome bearing sperm gives off more light than the Y chromosome due to the additional DNA. And the desired sperm is then used to fertilize the ova, and then it can either be done by IUI, which is intrauterine insemination, or IVF. This is the second way, if it's gender-linked, how you can do it. Now, the question here is a very simple question. Do we allow gender selection through these methods for a Jewish couple? I would say to you, this question has arisen, And after discussing this matter with leading halachic authorities in Israel, the ruling was the following, that in the face of despondent people who suffer mental anguish in fear of giving birth to sick children, in that case, therefore, in a case of serious genetic disease which affects the couple, it's difficult to forbid genetic screening, even for gender selection. And I think this today, and I would say today, PGD is accepted even in Orthodox communities. It's accepted. Now, there's one other question, and this I think I want to discuss with you. What do you do with the embryos which have to be discarded? Can you discard a living embryo? Could be a question of abortion. Now, in Jewish law, abortion is not allowed unless it's a question of risk of life, but otherwise abortion is not allowed. Can you abort? In other words, can you discard, get rid of an embryo which is already fertilized, so living? Can you do it or not? And I would take the question further. Is the embryo a living entity or not? Now, I think in Jewish law, we're told that an embryo, even if it's not 40 days old, right at the beginning, within the first 40 days, if there's a question of desecrating the Sabbath to keep the embryo alive. Let me take an example. A fertility clinic where they have in vitro fertilization and they have live fertilized eggs. And something happens in a Jewish hospital, say a Shaare Tzedek in Yerushalayim, which is an Orthodox hospital. Something happens on Shabbos that the fuse went, which could affect the embryos. Are you allowed to switch on the light to save these embryos? If it's a Jewish person, a living person, it's a danger to his life, of course you can do it. Can you do it for an embryo? And there is a Ramban, which is Nachmanides, which is quoted in Jewish law, that for an embryo you can be Machalel Shabbat. You can desecrate the Shabbos, because potential life also has the same law, there's exactly the same law as somebody who is alive. That means an unborn fetus, even in the first 40 days, although it lacks human status, nevertheless, you can desecrate the Shabbos. And the basis of this is the rationale, anticipation of potential development and subsequent attainment of human status creates certain privileges and obligations with regard to the undeveloped fetus. Hence, you can be Mechalel Shabbat, you can desecrate the Shabbos to save that fetus. The question is, maybe it's only a fetus which is in the uterus of the person. If it's in vitro, maybe it doesn't apply. And I must tell you that here I took advice from leading authorities in Israel, and in fact, in the Shaare Tzedek is a Jewish Orthodox hospital in Jerusalem. In the Shaare, they also have a fertility clinic, and they also have a clinic for PGD. And they discard embryos which are not used. They discard them. And in fact, even in IVF, every clinic of IVF, after a certain period of time, you've got to discard them. You've got to get rid of them. Now, how do you get rid of them? They're living beings. The answer is, if they haven't been inserted into the uterus, they haven't got an identity of a potential living. Because unless it's in the wife or in the woman who's pregnant, then it doesn't have that power to stop us. And hence, if it's in a fertility clinic, IVF, you couldn't be Mechal Shabbos. If the light went off and you're going to lose these embryos, so you've lost them. This law that you can desecrate the Shabbos for something which potential, it's only if the potential is already active. It's in the woman herself, and it's growing in the woman. If it's in vitro, it doesn't apply. Sha'arei Tzedek, they discard the embryos which are in vitro. So therefore, I think this is basically what I'm going to speak about. I've left you with a few questions, and I think I've still got 5 minutes, a little bit of time for people who want to ask questions with pleasure. If I can answer it, I'll answer. I think you'll have to take a microphone or something. Yeah. Somebody got a microphone?
I have a question about the PGD technique. You're making a selection only based on the sex of the child.
Where it's a question of therapeutic.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have a cousin who has he's a hemophiliac.
Yes.
And
genetic?
Yes. Yeah. He tested all 3 daughters, and they were all carriers. And all 3 of them chose to have children.
Yes.
The first daughter only had a girl. The second daughter only had, well, she had a girl and a boy, and that boy was fine.
And the girl?
The third daughter had 2 boys. Fine. One was fine, and the second one is a hemophiliac.
So it's not gender-linked.
But
not gender-linked.
But if you're testing...
Yes. I'm talking about where sex selection, because you know it's gender-linked.
But if all 3 of the daughters were carriers...
Yes. Doesn't mean that you're a carrier. It's got to go further.
General information, because I understand Rabbi is not a physician. He can address legal issues of that. But all female can be carriers. They may not be carriers even if the father was a hemophiliac. The men, however, depending on what they inherit, may have hemophilia or not. Did I clear up the issue, or I muddied it up?
The question is, if they're going to, my question is if she was going to test her 2...
Did she go through in vitro fertilization?
No, but if she did and decided she knew she was going to have a son...
Yes.
If he might have hemophilia because her father did...
I would say to you the following. In your case, I'm not sure it was gender-linked. I have a feeling if they would have done PGD, they would have found it in the in vitro fertilization. They would have found exactly the genetic disease, in this case hemophilia. They would have found it. Most probably you could find that. There are many diseases you can find, and I'm sure that could be found. But unfortunately, she didn't do. She wasn't advised to do it. Today, they would have advised her to go through PGD, and most probably they would have found it. Maybe out of 4, maybe they'll find 1 which is good, or maybe they'll find 2 which is good, and maybe all the 4 will be good. Doesn't mean that all of them have to have it.
So I would like to, can I ask you a question?
Yes,
that derives from the things you told us at the beginning, and you invited this question, and then you didn't answer it, so I'm going to ask you, so you have a chance to answer it. and that is that in the case of a couple where they don't want to adopt, but they want to have a child that has the man's genetic composition, and the woman does not have ova, and also cannot be the mom, cannot carry the child. So they end up with 3 mothers.
See?
Exactly. And I want to know what the status is of the mother who wanted to be the mother but couldn't supply the ovum and could not carry the child. And then eventually the child ends up with that family. So
Good question. Here is somebody who's a wife, but she's not a mother. That means she has no ova, and she can't carry either. So, in actual fact, halachically, from a Jewish ethical point of view, she's not the mother. Somebody else is the mother. She'll be quite happy with this child, not worse than what are you when you adopt a child? Are you the mother? It's exactly the same. I would say it's exactly the same. The question is, out of the two, the one who gave the ova and the one who carried it, which one is the mother? So maybe there are not 3 mothers, can only be 2 mothers. Or which one of the two? Questionable. Yeah.
Dr. Patel, do you want to ask any questions? Anybody else?
There's the question of, I understand there was some question that was raised on, not in this lecture, but in general on adultery with the husband inseminating another woman. If she is, let's say, going to be the carrier of...
Again.
A question of adultery.
Of what?
Of adultery.
Yes.
If the husband inseminates another woman to carry the child for him because his own wife can't carry the child.
Just a moment. Who was the genes of who?
The woman who's going to carry the child. No, not even necessarily a bank. Just a woman who's going to have the child for the wife who can't have the children. Is there any question of adultery in that situation?
Just a moment. I'm not with you with the question.
Okay.
Who is it's the sperm of the husband.
The sperm of the husband, and then a whole separate woman who's going to be the surrogate mother, or going to be the mother of the child, but not the wife.
He has a relationship with another woman? What do you mean?
But just for artificial insemination purposes.
I don't think I have to answer that question, but if it's not the wife, and it's another woman, not married woman, I imagine.
He means if the father wants to donate the sperm to another woman to be a surrogate, not to his wife. So he's asking if there would be a question of adultery if in a laboratory.
I want to make one thing clear.
Taken to in a laboratory.
In vitro fertilization is not adultery in Jewish law. Hence, if there would be a woman who would donate an ova, a married woman would donate an ova, a Jewish woman, and the husband, who's also married, another husband, not her husband, another husband, and he would donate his sperm, and it would be fertilized in vitro. Whoever carries it, the child has no stigma whatsoever. There's no adultery. Adultery is only a sexual relationship in Jewish law. Clear? Okay.
I'm not sure if you're going to need to answer this one either, but I am curious. Of course, in this country, the Defense of Marriage Act is under attack. The concept of a marriage between a man and a woman is under attack. But could you comment about Jewish law regarding same-gender couples? Male-male, female-female. Is this? What is your? Can you just make a few comments about that? Particularly, maybe in that clinic that you referred to, the Orthodox clinic in Israel. Is there treatment of same-gender couples in Israel?
I must tell you that last week in Parliament in England, Cameron managed to get through that gays and lesbians can marry each other. Gays and lesbians can marry each other officially. The vast majority of the Conservatives were against it, But he had Labour, all the Labour candidates, they all voted for it, and a minority, people who were employed or got their post through the Prime Minister, they voted for the Prime Minister and got a majority. You're asking me from a Jewish point of view. I'm going to quote to you a Gemara, a piece of the Talmud. Mind-boggling. The Talmud says that everything in this world can only exist if it has some contact to Torah. Now you may say, the non-Jewish world has no contact to Torah. Yes, the non-Jewish world also has a Torah. They're the 7 laws of the Noachide laws, which apply to every person. Hence, we exist because we've got the Torah. The non-Jewish people who exist, they also have a Torah, a different one. We have 613 commandments, they have 7. So the Gemara, the Talmud asks a very simple question. But most people don't keep the Torah. Jewish people at least have a guilty conscience. But if you take the non-Jewish world, there's a law that a non-Jewish person, one of the 7 laws of Noach, the Noachide law, you're not allowed to have homosexual relationships. It's a law written in the Bible. So the Gemara asks the kasha, but they don't keep it. So the Gemara says, no, they do keep it. They keep the laws of homosexuality. So the Gemara said, what law? But they seem to be practicing homosexuality and lesbian. So the Gemara said, they do it, but they have a guilty conscience, because they wouldn't make a marriage between 2 males and 2 females. This is what the Gemara says. Unfortunately today, we've come to a stage where even the Bnei Noach, the Noachide laws, this is also permitted. So the question is, how do they exist? Question mark. But one thing is clear to me. From a Jewish point of view, it's written quite clearly in the Torah that a homosexual relationship, I agree, there may be people who have a tendency to homosexuality. They have to be helped. You have to try and help them. But an active homosexual or a lesbian is not permitted according to Jewish law and Jewish ethical laws. And therefore, this law which has been passed is unfortunate. It's unfortunate. But unfortunately, it means that the morals of the world are going down. And we have to encourage ourselves and our community that we shouldn't fall in the same trap. And therefore, I can't add more to it than that. Yeah.
Thank you, Rabbi, for the erudite exposition on Talmudic law. I'm curious, though.
Pardon?
How applicable is the Talmudic law in the major cities, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, where IVF programs work? Are the Talmudic laws generally observed?
What, the IVF?
In IVF programs, couples seeking assisted reproduction through these high-tech procedures, is Talmudic law ordinarily honored, or is the society in Israel?
Where? In
Israel, major cities in Israel. Is it?
They don't keep.
I'm asking the question whether they do honor Talmudic law, or they find ways around it.
I would say that naturally in every religion you have people who are orthodox and you have people who are not observant. I would say a hospital like Bikur Cholim, Shaarei Tzedek in Jerusalem, and I would imagine even in Tel Aviv, the big hospitals, they would keep the laws, fertility clinics would keep the laws of the Talmud. They would keep the laws of the Talmud. Shaarei Tzedek, I don't know whether you know what Shaarei Tzedek is, a very big hospital in Jerusalem, and it's run on Orthodox lines, one of the best hospitals in Israel, and they all keep this. And I would imagine the major hospitals, even in Tel Aviv and in Haifa, would also keep these laws.
What about single women that want to get pregnant through donor insemination? Is that something that's consistent with the...
I wouldn't encourage it. Marriage is the answer. I tell you what sort of question I do get. There are young ladies who unfortunately haven't found their partners yet, and are not married, and they feel that they're at an age where they may not be able to produce ova, and they would like to put ova into a bank that when they get married, maybe at the age of 45, 50, at least they could have children with their own ova. That's a question. But to have children as a single mother, as a single person, I certainly wouldn't encourage it. I wouldn't encourage it.
But if that's the only option for them.
If what?
I mean, if that's the only option, then you're okay with it.
If a child is born from a single mother, it's Jewish. It's a proper Jewish child. There's no question about it. It's not illegitimate, has no stigma, but it has no father. There's no father. At least the child will grow up without a father. It's not a good thing. A child needs a father and a mother. Fine. Any more questions?
No.
Yeah. Fine, in fact.